life. Before he was concerned for his safety. Now he becomes, for the first time, concerned for his life. Well, did the Chicago administration, city fathers, etc., did they like all this publicity and violence that was going on? No. So what did they do with Dr. King? Began to negotiate how they could make education, employment, and discriminatory or unfair housing practices better in Chicago. So Dr. King and his followers met with the city leadership of Chicago and they reached an agreement. Okay, what's going to happen? Each side is going to have to give something up, aren't they? So what is Martin Luther King and the SCLC going to give up? What are they going to do? Quit marching. Okay, they're going to quit demonstrating and marching in Chicago. What in turn are the city fathers going to have to give up to get this marching to stop? They're going to have to promise to improve what? Education, employment, and housing opportunities in Chicago. Once they promised to do that, then Martin Luther King Jr. said that the SCLC would stop their demonstrations and marches. And they actually did some nice things. The city leaders kept their word and actually tried very hard to improve in those three areas. But the point was, it was a worthwhile march for Martin Luther King Jr. because he got something done. Now, do you think the younger generation of Negroes just bought that right up? No, they actually had a hard time believing that change would ever occur. And so now they were looking for a different philosophy of civil rights, not the non-violent philosophy, but now they're looking for the what? Violent philosophy. Okay? This happened especially after who was assassinated? Malcolm X. Okay, he was assassinated by his own people, by the way. Just a different faction, but black people. Okay? So after the assassination of radical leader Malcolm X, many young Negroes interpreted the slain leader's death as a sacrifice for the Black Revolution, so he became a what? A martyr for the Black Power movement. Okay? So again, despite this effort by Martin Luther King in Chicago, many of the younger generation of Negroes believed that change would not occur. They were now looking for a different philosophy of civil rights, a more violent philosophy, a more radical philosophy, and that became even more evident after the assassination of radical leader Malcolm X. Young Negroes interpreted his death as a sacrifice for the Black Revolution. He became a martyr in those young people's minds and became a martyr for that new movement we talked about, which was Black Power. Okay? So that is the fourth example of 6 of violence that occurred during the civil rights movement during the time that Lyndon Johnson was president. Okay? We'll move on to the 5th example. Riots in Detroit, Michigan. Riots in Detroit, Michigan. Okay, one riot in Los Angeles wasn't enough. So in July of 1967, another major riot occurred, this time in the city of Detroit. Okay, July of 1967, another major riot occurred, this time in the city of Detroit. No specific way it started, just tensions between blacks and whites. And again, the National Guard was sent in to help restore order, although this one was a little more Western, so to speak, than the one in Watts. They also had to send in federal paratroopers to help restore order, and some of these had just returned from where and thought they might have an easy time? Vietnam. So on July of 1967, another major riot occurred in the United States in Detroit. The National Guard was sent in to help restore order, and they also brought in federal paratroopers who were just returning from Vietnam. They're going to go into the city of Detroit and restore order, which they might think is an easy gig compared to what they've been doing. However, we'll see. Okay. Now, when the paratroopers came in, they actually were under fire at the outskirts of Detroit. As they tried to come into the city of Detroit, they were fired upon. By who? Rioters. Black rioters, fired upon. And as a result, the military actually had to set up an operational post at a nearby school. So they take over the school, and this becomes a military center in Detroit, Michigan, to try to get these people under control. They got to now bring in the military to take care of this. More than just the National Guard. They have to bring in paratroopers who are fired upon, and now the military is concerned. So they actually set up a military post inside a public school in Detroit. Now there are four corners of a school building, right? Okay, so here's the building. They put floodlights and machine gun nests in all four corners of that school building. Can you believe that? This is in the United States of America. So they install floodlights and machine gun nests in all four corners of that school to protect themselves from these rioters that are putting on quite a show in Detroit. So they install floodlights and machine gun nests in all four corners of the school building. Now, have you ever seen Jeep patrols? You probably haven't, maybe in the movies, but they're basically Jeeps. And what do they have mounted in the back of the Jeep on these patrols? M16 machine guns. So we've got Jeep patrols in Detroit with M16 machine guns mounted in different sections of the city, trying to keep order. We also have tanks that the National Guard brought in. This is in Detroit, Michigan. And you know what these paratroopers' job was during this riot? Was to try to recover the tanks that the rioters had taken away from the National Guard. So these rioters have tanks, for crying out loud. Are U.S. tanks there in possession of? I mean, picture this in your mind. This is in the United States of America. Jeep patrols with M16 machine guns mounted, driving all over town. A school set up with floodlights and machine gun nests in all four corners. Paratroopers trying to take away tanks from the rioters who took them from the National Guard. So here's the end result of this riot when it ends. Okay? So they get it under control, finally, and here's the end result. 43 people were killed. Nearly all black. 43 people were killed in the riots in Detroit. 25% of the entire city was burned. 25% of Detroit burned. $46 million lost in Watts, correct? $50 million of property loss. Just property destroyed. $50 million worth of property destroyed. Guess what the total losses were if you put everything together? Guess what it cost to get that thing under control? $150 million in 1967. That's what the losses were. That's what it, you take all the things that were damaged and what it cost to clean that up. $150 million. You know what the mayor of Detroit compared Detroit to? He made a comment. He compared it to war-torn Berlin in 1945 after the European theater of World War II. That's what he compared Detroit. It looked like war-torn Berlin. That was his comparison. So who do you think very happily printed pictures of U.S. Army tanks in the streets of Detroit? What? Oh God, we were a little bit, we probably did, but who gleefully did it? Who did it with pride? Huh? A newspaper called Prava. And where was that located? Anybody want to guess where that newspaper is located? Who would pridefully show this mess in their paper? Say it.
I don't know.
I think you have the right answer.
Russia?
Russia! Don't be thinking you don't know, you know! Prava, the most important, most prestigious newspaper in Russia, is gleefully putting all these pictures of the riots in Detroit in their newspaper. Who took unbelievable pressure because of the two riots in Watts and Detroit? President Johnson. Unbelievable heat. And I'm going to tell you tomorrow to finish up this one, what he did. He took 3 specific actions concerning these riots to try to fix the heat that he was taking as a problem. What we're going to do the rest of the period is help me out here. So we'll finish that with that today, and tomorrow we'll tell you what President Johnson did to take the heat off himself in these riots and to try to help the rioting problem in general, so we didn't have another one. He did not want to have another riot in a major city during his presidency.